Hey there folks, welcome back to the channel. So based on the title, you might be a little bit perplexed. Usually I take on something a little bit deeper as far as the subject matter is concerned, but sometimes it's good to go back to the basics. So if, this is not the kind of video that you need or nothing that you have any interest in, well then, I don't know why you clicked on it, but nonetheless, I do want to talk a little bit about the whole idea behind when to utilize the different third-party graders. And this isn't going to be exhaustive, and I'm not going to cover every third-party grader, but I'm going to talk about the main ones and talk about two different scenarios. And the first one that I'll start off with is going to be the buying version of it from the perspective of the ROI. So if you're grading for potentially resale or flipping or whatever the case may be, to me, that's the more straightforward one. So that's why I'm going to lead off with that one. And for some people, that's all they care about. And then I want to talk about it from the collector perspective, because there are some nuances in there that are a little bit different that you might want to bear in mind. Now, I'm going to start doing this at the beginning of the video just to make sure we've got it covered. As always, appreciate always if you like and subscribe, and those are free. And if you do want to support the channel and do find any value in a video like this, sharing it, of course, is also free. And if you do want to support the channel in any other way, in the description, there are a couple of ways you can do so. I'm not going to harp on that, but I will mention it from time to time in these videos. I'm starting off here on the Instagram page because that's the hub where I put everything through when it's not on the YouTube channel. I do occasionally promote stuff on the YouTube channel like this one here, where I had my discussion with Billy Cilio of Upper Deck, where we had a chat about the new AEW product that came out, and that has since come out. And I'll probably do a different video coming up here later on in the week where I talk a little bit about how I decided to do my buying strategy. And even though everybody might not be interested in professional wrestling cards, and that's completely fine and understandable, I do think there is some use to the idea behind how do you decide as a buying strategy? What do you do when you're grabbing cards for a brand new product? Something that doesn't have any comps yet, something that may not have any established track record. And this one kind of covers all the ground because Upper Deck has never done wrestling cards and AEW's never had a set. So it's actually the perfect storm of we really don't have very much to go off of. So we're almost making things up as we go along. We don't have established prices, established norms, and stuff like that can get really tricky. So it's not meant to be an exhaustive thing, but at the same point, when it comes to something like that, I can definitely at least give you some ideas about how I like to approach it. It won't guarantee that you won't overpay for something, but at least it'll give you some stuff to think about. Let's get into the main video here. Of course, I'm going to be talking about the main ones. I'm going to be talking about PSA, SGC, CSG, to a lesser degree Beckett. I'm not even going to put up the Beckett site because honestly, I probably wouldn't steer you that way first, only because Beckett's been a bit of a black box for a while. So I'll stick to the main four there. What about something like HGA? Well, let's nod and say we did. If you're interested in HGA, may I interest you in a one-touch? To me, it's about equivalent, and I would pay about the same premium for a one-touch, your card in a one-touch, as I would with an HGA holder. I'm not even going to discuss it again. We'll stick to the main quote-unquote four for now, so to speak. But there's two different considerations. When you're talking about it from the ROI flipping perspective, honestly, like I said, I think it's simpler. And the only reason I say so is that it's really a math problem. That's all you're really trying to do. Which one of these graders you want to use, theoretically, you could use any of them. But really what it comes down to is what you're trying to figure out is two things. Number one, how quickly do you need something back? Is it time sensitive? Well, if it's time sensitive, then you're going to have to consider potentially paying a more expensive option. But also, at the same time, is the time sensitive so important that it offsets the cost portion of it? Because when we're looking at these different ones, they all have different, returns as far as, potential sale prices. PSA, whether people like it or not, and I understand if they don't, it still gets the best, usually, generally gets the best return on investment as far as, if you get a PSA 10. If you get a PSA 10, that will tend to sell for more than a lot of the other ones, unless you get something like a black label from BGS or, maybe a pristine from SGC. I'd have to look at the numbers on that. But regardless, consistently, it will be one of the higher returns if that's your objective. The way PSA is right now, their lowest price tier is at $100. So that's where the math thing comes into it. So when you're looking at the best bang for your buck, return versus cost, probably SGC would be your best bet. But when you go to resell, it may go for a lower price, especially if you don't get the 10. At the same time, something like a CSG right now is also a little bit on the slow side. But there may be some advantages to it. You can get subgrades, which the other two that I provided don't do. Beckett does do subgrades, but as I said, they're a little bit of a black box right now. So when you're looking at this from a resale perspective, here's what you're really looking at. You're looking at what the potential resale is, but that's only part of the equation. What you want to do in addition to that is you want to say to yourself, okay, how quickly do I need it back? That's going to be part of my determining thing, depending on what my best options are. And I would really weigh them all. I would really at least consider them. And I would look at the price that it's going to cost you. You say, whatever the price of the card is, plus the price of the grading you're going to do, plus shipping, plus insurance, plus return shipping, whatever, include all the whole value, add it all up, and then you got to do a little bit of research. And in all honesty, if you're really being smart about it, I would at least consider that whatever you think the grade is going to be, no matter how experienced you think you are, at least take into consideration what it would look like if it got a grade lower than you expected. Is the return still worth sending it in at that price? If the answer is no, then you may want to look at potentially a less expensive option and then rerun the numbers again and see if it still makes sense. If it still doesn't make sense after that, well, then maybe it's not a card that you should send in at all. Let's save some money and let's not send in something that we need the best case scenario in order to do well on. And that's the kind of consideration you have to make. It's really a math problem. Whatever the cost is going to be, that's on one side of the ledger. And whatever you think the potential return is, give yourself not necessarily the worst case scenario, but don't give yourself the best case scenario. Say to yourself, oh, I think it's a 10. Well, if you send it to Beckett and it gets a 9.5, are you still okay? If it gets a 9 and you were thinking 9.5, is that still okay? Same thing with SGC, same thing with CSG, and same thing with PSA. You think it's a 10? What if it gets a 9? If it gets a 9, are you in the red or are you still in the black a little bit, but maybe not by as much? Do you break even? And then you figure out whether it makes sense to you or not. PSA might make sense for certain cards, but if you're on the borderline, $100 a card, which is the lowest tier they have available at the time I'm recording this, might not be worth it at all. So that's kind of one of the things you have to factor in. So if it's not worth it at all, well then scratch PSA from the equation. Look at the SGC. Does it make sense there? You might get a little bit less for resale, but as long as you can get it back in a reasonable period of time, which you can, they're pretty good about it right now, and $30 a card, does that make sense? That's where that math problem comes into play. You figure that out and you're good to go. So that's as far as I'm concerned when it comes to resale. That's really all you have to think about. Like I said, it's actually very simple. You just got to run out a little bit of math, grab your calculator, figure it out, and then you'll know what to do from there. As far as a collector is concerned, it's a little bit different. It's actually a little bit trickier. And the reason is because there's a little bit more nuance to this. It could be the fact that maybe you're in the PSA set registry. So then you're kind of bound a little bit more to PSA. Well, in that case, maybe if the price is too high right now, you're going to have to wait until the price to drop. You're going to have to be more patient. Quick thing I want to mention, because I know somebody in the comments will mention it. At this point in time, I'm not concerned about what the backlog is. I don't care. I'm only talking about something where you're considering submitting right now. And to be perfectly blunt, if you're willing to pay the $100, you're probably going to get back in a reasonable period of time, regardless of what was happening with the backlog right now, because the stuff that's left in the backlog is the value in bulk. And unfortunately, those folks are going to have to wait longer, while somebody submitting right now is probably going to be surprised how quickly they're able to get some of that stuff back relative to what you might be expecting. SGC, I think, is the best combination right now of value in terms of the price per card versus the return. So if that's a priority for you, that's something you definitely want to consider. CSG probably has the best value option, but you are going to have to wait. So that's, and again, one of the considerations you have to do. How quickly do you need it back versus price point? Another factor that you got to consider a little bit about is aesthetics. Maybe you like the PSA holder, or maybe it matches with your set registry set. That might be a consideration for you. Maybe you prefer the tuxedo. Some people definitely do, so you can see it right here on the screen as I'm sharing with you. To me, I'm not that excited about the tuxedo, but I do think it looks good with certain cards, so I would not certainly knock you if that's a big consideration factor. Again, $30 a card for most for a base level card isn't too bad. And as I said, CSG, for a lot of people, the label is a turnoff. I'm one of those folks where I'm not a big fan of the label, but I do think the clarity of the slab is actually really good. I'm very impressed with that. And I do think the fact you can get subgrades if you want is wonderful. But for PC, so if we're talking PC right now, and this is the consideration that I would do, my order would be, number one, I want to make sure the aesthetic is good, because if it's PC, and I'm going to make a distinction here, there are folks that talk about PC cards, and they're talking about PC cards where maybe one day they would still consider selling it. So then the ROI conversation comes into it a little bit more. Then that might change your answer. But then for other folks, you're talking PC for life. If you're talking PC for life, then what you're doing right here, guys, is you're buying a holder. You're buying a fancy holder. So for me, the first consideration is the aesthetic, because I want the card to look good in the holder. That's going to be one important thing for me. A second important thing for me, and to be honest, it's the next step right after, is going to be flat out cost. I got to consider, is it worth it for me to put it in the fancy holder? How much am I willing to pay for that? And how does that play into it? The aesthetic is super important to me, but then right after that is cost. And they're basically 1 and 1A, very close to each other. So for when it comes to a consideration like this, if I was going to send in something from my PC right now, I do care about the price that I'm sending it in, not because I'm worried about the ROI in this case, but it's because I really don't want to pay too much for a fancy holder. as opposed to, and be able to get a bunch of cards that I want to have in my PC sent back. So it's one of those things. And I also don't want to wait forever, but I might be more inclined to wait a little bit longer to save some money. And that's kind of the balancing act that you have to kind of run on this. So let's go through these for a second and just kind of see where we're at. So if I'm looking at it from the ROI perspective, PSA is in play. But from a PC perspective right now at $100 a card, it's not in play. It doesn't matter any of my cards in my collection, even stuff that would probably be worth it, quote unquote, from the perspective of value. At $100 a card, I'm not in. At $50 a card, I'm not in. Somewhere in the 20 to 30 range, I might be in, because then at least it's at a price point that I'm happy with. SGC, we move over. A lot of people really love the tuxedo holder. I'm not as big a fan on it. I definitely have SGC cards in my collection, and kind of as I'm talking to you, I have a stack of them right with me, so that I can look at them, and that includes the new slab and everything as well. And I've taken a look at these quite a bit, and I've had a chance to experience them just to make sure that I'm up to date as far as my feelings on these are concerned, because I've had some of the old SGC holders as well, and they're not bad. And for a lot of cards, they can look really good. SGC's problem for me in this one is that while in the ROI discussion, there might be some case points that I can definitely go to where I can say that it would make sense to me, because you can get the cards back at a reasonable period of time. $30 a card is too high for me for PC cards. Now, I believe you can get them a little bit cheaper if you send them through a bulk grader that has a good deal set up with SGC, but $30 a card is beyond the threshold that I'm willing to go in order to send in a PC card. So the key for me, as I said, the aesthetic is important. I'm not bound to the SGC one because the aesthetic isn't so good for me on that one that, oh man, I have to get it in an SGC slab. I love the tuxedo. I think the tuxedo's all right. I'm not super excited about it, but I would certainly have no issue having cards in my collection with that. I've bought SGC cards and have no reason to crack them out. They look perfectly fine in the holder. But to me, it's not exciting enough to prompt me to choose that over other options just because of the tuxedo. If SGC was down to 15 or 20 bucks a card, I'm right back in the game. Same as PSA. So between those two, I kind of want them in the same price point for it to make sense for me. Now that leads me to the third option here. And I'm ignoring Beckett not because I wouldn't have a Beckett card in my collection. Again, in the same vein, I definitely do. But with Beckett, the combination of the price point right now, the availability, and the fact that they're a black box where you send something in, you have no idea what the current status of it is, a lot of that is a turnoff. And honestly, price point wise, they're nowhere in the game right now. So until they change that, at the time that I'm recording this in January 2022, they're an option, but under very specific use cases. You would really need something very specific that you would really want in that Beckett holder. Maybe you want subgrades, whatever the case may be. Obviously, PSA or SGC are not going to provide that for you. And you want to have a reasonable resale value because BGS still has it, even though they've done a lot to hurt themselves. But if you want subgrades and you want another option, we can look at the fourth option here, which is going to be CSG. Now, I do want to touch on a couple of things about CSG to kind of update what I've talked about in the past about this third-party grader. It's still the one that is kind of it's close to being good for me, but it's one of those things where the label and everything is still kind of a sticking point. However, I will say this, and I have one of the CSG cards with me right now that I've actually picked up on a recent eBay lot, and the label is bothering me less and less as I have additional exposure to these, to be perfectly honest with you. And again, I'm speaking now strictly as a PC from a collection standpoint. I don't mind having these cards in my collection. One thing that I like about them a lot is that the holder is sturdy. I like that. I also like the fact that the plastic is exceedingly clear. I do like that, especially for certain cards in particular. It helps the card pop very nicely. It's very clear and it allows you to really enjoy the features of the card. Now, one other thing that I wasn't aware of, I was sure they had something like it, but I didn't get a chance to really try it out until today that I'm talking to you, is that on the back, very similar to these other third-party graders, they've got a lot of these QR codes and things like that. And what happens with this one is that I tried it on my phone, and then I also tried it on the website, and I'm going to show it to you on the website. And what happened is, with the QR code, it lets you scan it in order to see and confirm and verify the card, which is very similar to what a PSA does. And one thing the PSA has started to do recently that I like, and this is again from a PC piece, from a peace of mind perspective, this is a nice little feature. PSA has gotten to the point where now, going forward, and for some cards previously, but now going forward for every card, they're scanning the card front and back so that you have it as an additional security feature and you're able to confirm that the card that you have in your hand is matching to the one in the holder. So actually I'm going to be able to show that to you here today, and then I'll include that as part of kind of this video. So if you say verify CSG certification, you can put in the certificate number, and I have it here. So I'm going to just paste it right in, and it lets us see the card. So it is a 1997 Topps. Now, this labeling doesn't actually show everything, and I'll actually be able to see. So if you can see at the bottom here, it actually has front and back scans of the card, which is actually quite good. And that is the very same card that I've got in my hand right now. It's a 1997 Topps Interleague Matchups. It is a refractor with Ken Griffey Jr. and Dante Bichette, and the Griffey's on the front and Dante Bichette's on the back. So it's a double-sided refractor there in a CSG 9. A really nice looking card, and looks great in the holder, and then these images are very well done. And then you can zoom in on it, which is great. So pretty sweet. Love the 90s Griffies, so that's awesome. And then we got the Dante Bichette on the back here, and you can zoom in on that. I would love for the scan not to be crooked, but nonetheless, the point is this is the card that I have in my hand, and this is the card that I can see here on the site, and I'm able to validate that. So they did image it, which is really cool. I think that's a great little feature. So for me, if I was going to look at it today, so with everything I just said here, my number one thing personally for me is the aesthetic. So right now, even though the label isn't my favorite, I love the clear plastic and I love the sturdy holder. PSA for me is still a solid holder. Again, it's not the most exciting holder. I'm not going to pretend it is, but it's a good one. And a lot of cards in my collection are in PSA, and I'm perfectly happy with it. SGC is solid. The tuxedo look is going to work for some folks, not so much for others. For me, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm okay with it. I have no issue. I would pick up an SGC card, but at $30 a card, it's not going to play for me. The reason that CSG is probably a little bit more interesting to me is because, number one, I like this feature that I can validate the card. That's cool. And then have a nice little scan and image. That's kind of nice. But then the other piece that I kind of like that is that if you're willing to be a little bit patient, or if you're willing to join the membership or whatever the case is, or maybe do it through a bulk grader, I would say the price point on more PC type cards is actually not too bad. So you can see, obviously, we've got the different levels and walk through, express, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take a look at the bulk, it's up to $250 a card, and that's $12. That's without the subgrades, though. So if you do add the subgrades, you have to add $10 to it, so it'd be $22 a card. Economy would be $20 plus $10 if you wanted the subgrades. For PC, I probably would be less concerned about subgrades. So I'm looking at between $12 and $20. If I want to be very patient, $12, but you can get it in bulk, or participate in a bulk, submission with other people. Or if you do it with economy, you're looking at about 60 days. Again, you have to be patient. You can do up to $500 a card, but $20 is kind of the magic number right now. And in all honesty, though, it becomes a lot more interesting if PSA is able to get eventually back down to that $20 price point. I would expect that if they do, then SGC would probably be looking at that, or maybe even $15 a card, in which case they become a lot more interesting. And then it's kind of a 3-horse race for me. Beckett, I don't know what it's going to take for them to get back in the game as far as that's concerned. I'm really not sure. But for me, the considerations really come down to CSG, if I was going to send in a bunch of cards. SGC would be viable if it's maybe a more valuable card where I can kind of justify the $30 a little bit more. But if it's just a card that's, got reasonable value for the collection, $30 is too much for me. Somewhere between this $12 and $20 category would probably be really good for that kind of thing. Otherwise, I'd have no hesitation about buying one of these already graded, but then I'm, taking into account that I'm saving the grading fee. And I don't have to wait, which is always a very nice thing, as a collector. But for PC purposes, CSG is looking like an increasingly viable option as it stands right now in January 2022 for my specific parameters. And the point of this entire video is just talking you through my thought process on this. It isn't to say that I'm recommending CSG. No, I'm not. It may not work for you. It may not be interesting. You may hate the holder. You may hate the label. You may not be interested in any of that aspect of it. You'd rather just pay $30 and send it to SGC. Perfectly fine. The only point that I want to make with this video is that there is a thought process to it. It's not automatically, it shouldn't be like PSA for life. If it makes sense for you and there's a reason you're doing it, maybe you're in the set registry and that's really important to you, well then maybe just wait longer until the price comes back down to a more reasonable level that works for you and you're able to get a reasonable turnaround time, quote unquote. Otherwise, you can send it them right now at the current price point if you're willing to pay $100 a card, and you should be able to get it in a reasonable period. SGC right now is the best balance between price and return, and in return in terms of cards. CSG is viable to you though if you do like the clarity of the holder. If you've seen one in hand, you'll see that the holder is pretty sturdy and the clarity of the plastic is really good. If you're willing to wait a little bit longer, the economy and bulk here are pretty nice for PC type of cards. So that is an option. Or if you like taking your chances and you're a gambling individual, well then BGS is out there as well. If you want to go with one of those other graders, well then by all means, your mileage may vary. That probably would be the direction that I would go, but I leave it to you. So this video, like I said, is more than anything just talking through the thought process behind a lot of this stuff. It isn't as simple as, oh yeah, just go SGC or go Beckett or go PSA or even CSG. There's a pluses and minuses to all of them. They've all started to do little things that have started to slowly add to it. Obviously, none of them are ideal. In a perfect world, we'd love to be able to send in our PC cards at like 10 or 15 bucks each, be able to send as many as we want and get them back within, a couple of weeks or a month. And then, that would be closer to paradise for us as collectors. But we're not there yet. But given the options we have available today, there is some pluses and minuses and some options available to you that would allow you to at least be able to consider and figure out what works best for you. Or alternatively, maybe none of the options work for you yet, and you got to wait a little bit longer for either the prices to come down or for another option to come down the road, hopefully, that meets more of your criteria. Anyway, so that's it for this one. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, like and subscribe if you enjoy it. If the video was of any use to you, I'd love it if you'd share it with anybody that you think might get some use out of it. Otherwise, more videos to come up on the channel. Live stream coming up on Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern time, where we can talk about any of the hobby happenings or any other questions or thoughts that any of the chat have. That's always going to be in play. Otherwise, if there's anything else that you'd like me to cover or address, I'd love that as a comment as well, because I'm open to suggestions. Anyway, that's it for me this time around. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.